Hello, welcome to Your Story. This is a story from Laura Chepner. We're really delighted to speak to her. We're Henry and Henry, Annette and Graham Henry. And Laura, we want to know what it is that you haven't yet told the rest of the world. We're really delighted that you're willing to tell us your story. Could you start, please?
Of course, yeah, thank you. So, yes, I haven't really spoken publicly about the fact that I have or am a survivor of Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was diagnosed a few years back and have since had chemotherapy and radiotherapy. And the reason why I wanted to share my story with the both of you is just looking back and being able to reflect on it now. There are a few things that I can really attribute to my vegan, plant-based, raw, healthy diet that have kept me now 5 years later being in the clear and in the position that I am now. And thought, who better to share it with than the both of you?
Fantastic.
Well, we're really privileged and honoured to be able to do it. So it is an incredible story, the snippets we've heard so far. So just tell us basically your story from how you started at the age 11 to recognise, to look at food a little bit differently.
And would you also give just a brief explanation of what the illness is in case there's anybody who doesn't know what it is?
Yeah, of course. So I was 11 years old in my grandma's kitchen and she offered me a tongue sandwich, which I thought was a little bizarre. And being the inquisitive child that I was, I actually asked her, what is tongue? Why is the sandwich called tongue? And was vegetarian ever since, basically on the spot. I just couldn't fathom. It was one of those light bulb moments in my life. I was vegetarian from being 11 up until being about 32 years old, when I was weaning my daughter from breast milk to solids. And I was Googling, as you do, you know, what's the best vegetarian diet for my daughter? How can my daughter be a healthy vegetarian? And vegan just kept coming up over and over and over again. Eventually, I watched a video by Gary Yourofsky, the greatest video you will ever hear, or the greatest speech, I apologize, the greatest speech you will ever hear. And I became vegan on the spot because not only was it bringing back thoughts of being vegetarian for the animals, but now I was learning about optimum diet and the effects on the environment as well. And so at the time I was a teacher, and I really found that my ethics were beginning to clash with the curriculum that I had to teach. And I thought, you know what, I've been a waitress and a server throughout my university days. I'll open a vegan restaurant, which was ridiculous because I had no business acumen whatsoever. I had no experience. You know, it's one very different thing being a server to being an actual company director. But I jumped in 2 feet first, whilst my daughter was still very young. And the restaurant itself was amazing, incredible in so many ways. I live in a meat and 2 veg kind of little town, and it was welcomed and it was thriving. The only problem is that I ran myself into the ground. I worked 8 days a week, 25 hours a day. I was stressed, I was crying, I was undernourished. I was like that typical picture of the swan, where above you look as though everything's in control, but below I was flapping at 100 miles an hour. And I started to feel quite poorly, but I kept putting it down to stress. And I started to see spots and I put it down to stress. And I stopped sleeping and I stopped eating and I lost a lot of weight and I put it down to stress. And then I started to sweat at night and I put it down to stress. And I ignored it and I ignored it. I even had a little, in fact, it was on this side, vein pop out of my chest, which I just thought was hilarious because there's a program in the UK called Stressed Eric, where the character, when he was stressed, had, I don't know if you know, yeah, had a vein on his head pop out. And I thought, oh, hilarious, there's my stressed Eric. I've got my own vein. Until the day after my daughter's birthday party when she turned 3 and I collapsed. So going into hospital, didn't think much of it, told my symptoms to the doctor, who straight away told me that I had Hodgkin's lymphoma, referral. He would put through a referral for Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I, at the time, did not know what Hodgkin's lymphoma was. And then as he was closing the door on me, he said to me, Laura, I just would like you to know that just because I've mentioned the word cancer, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have cancer. Bye. And I stood outside his door thinking, he didn't mention cancer. So I phoned my mum and I said, Mum, what's Hodgkin's lymphoma? And she said, I'm in the supermarket, I'll call you back immediately. So I started to feel a little bit worried because he'd mentioned something and she seemed quite frantic. And what transpired after being admitted immediately, about a week or so later, was that I had a tumour in my chest that had grown from a lymph node that was at stage 3, and it was blocking my airway, which meant that I couldn't breathe properly, and was the reason why I'd lost a lot of weight, why I had the night sweats and the blind spots. And the Hodgkin's lymphoma had probably been there for quite a while, and that if I didn't have chemotherapy immediately, then I would die. And I read those words. I read those exact words. And so that was kind of, the wake-up call that I needed to slow down. I didn't really have a choice, and started therapy straight away.
Wow. Gosh, that is a major story. So from then on, did you carry on with the restaurant? What happened?
So my family worked at the restaurant. My mum made the cakes. My cousin also worked there as a server, and I'd grown a lovely vegan family around me as well. For the next year, they did keep the restaurant open. The way that my chemotherapy worked was that I had a fortnight gap in between each. It was called ABVD, the type of chemotherapy that I had. So I would have it on a Monday, and by Thursday, I would start to feel human again. And then by the Friday, it was pretty much out of my system due to the hard work that I put in, which I'll talk about, I'm sure, with you in a short while. And so then I had a second week where, although mentally a lot was going on, I could dip in, dip out, pop in, see how it was going, have a team meeting. But after radiotherapy, which was recommended after my chemotherapy, I was just so exhausted. And at that point, I just wanted to be with my daughter and my husband, who'd been my absolute rocks and who'd missed me for the duration of me being in the restaurant for the first year or so. We just decided that running a business such as the one that I had wasn't really conducive with health and wealth and happiness in the kind that I needed to move forward with.
So your body's really telling you, it's giving you a huge loud message, hasn't it, that it's time to change, and obviously, in a pretty profound way. So with regards to the chemotherapy, how long did that last?
So I had that first, I think it was something like 2 weeks for 6 months. It may have been a little longer. It was my husband who kept a record of all the dates and times, because I kept a mindset of, this isn't really happening, just power through it. Don't really take much attention to the dates and the times and things like that. Just go to your appointments. Often he would have to drag me to them, but I still went. But I think it was roughly about 6 months for the chemotherapy, and then another 2 or 3 months after that for radiotherapy. So it was a year all in all, where I was in and out of hospital.
And you mentioned to us earlier that you haven't told this story before, and there's a reason why not. Are you willing to tell us that part of the story again?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason why I'm sharing it now is because I feel as though the stuff that I learned along the way could be valuable to somebody else. But I was absolutely ashamed of my diagnosis, because in the first 6 months, when I was transitioning from having been a teacher to the director of the vegan restaurant, I was quite outspoken on social media platforms and out in public about the link between eating a meat and dairy diet and cancer. and I would post a lot of things about it, and didn't really know much of the science, hadn't really read many of the medical journals or articles. It was just things that I'd heard on social media that I was, you know, without really having done a lot of research, I was just sharing and sharing and sharing, and getting, you know, on the backs of a lot of people really, and annoying a lot of people and causing debate. And my husband was a bit like, oh, Laura, come on, give it a rest occasionally. I think one thing that I posted was something like feeding meat to your children is abuse. And I think I lost a lot of friends through that. And my husband actually said to me then, you must stop. And so you get the idea that, you know, I'd become a vegan and I wanted to change the world and I wanted everyone to know, and I was very vocal. And especially when I had the restaurant as well, that was kind of my outlet of just, you know, now I have the authority to talk to people because I'm a business owner. And you know, when I was diagnosed with cancer 9 months into having my vegan restaurant, I had thrust myself into the public eye. I was, you know, the restaurant that I opened is on the high street of you know, it was on a predominant corner of our high street. You couldn't miss it driving in or out of our town. And I was in magazines, best restaurants in Manchester, and I won best ethical runner-up in the Guardian restaurant newspaper. And so when I was diagnosed with cancer, it was just awful, heartbreaking, because I'd been harping on about the link between a meat and dairy diet and cancer. And then there I was, a vegan, the only vegan that a lot of people knew, because we're still talking about, you know, 5-6 years ago. And then I'd been diagnosed with cancer. And so I felt a lot of shame. I was very embarrassed. I didn't really want to talk about it. In fact, my 2 best friends from school, who I've known my entire life, found out about it because of an accidental post that I put on Facebook that I thought was private, and it was public. And so I was willing to keep the whole thing a secret from everybody who I knew, go through therapy and just come out of it at the end thinking, oh, I just felt like shaving my head, I fancied a change, and seriously keep it a secret. That's how embarrassed and ashamed I was.
It can be a lonely place as well, obviously, in that situation, when at a time when probably you were already feeling that you needed support of the people around you based on what you were going through. So that must have been pretty tough. And also, I think from what you said, a lot of people have a bias about when they see something that almost confirms their bias, they want to use that against you. So I can imagine that was a difficult time. And I guess that explains why you felt that way, even though from our perspective, there's no way that we would ever feel that you deserve that, because you've been through an incredibly difficult time. So how did your diet evolve as you come out of the chemotherapy, and how did things change for you?
Well, it was during, actually, Graham, because the moment that I was diagnosed with the cancer, I just had this feeling that I wanted to fix I've caused the problem, I'm going to fix the problem. And so immediately I became raw. So for about 5 to 6 months, I was a raw vegan. And I used my knowledge of fiber, especially. This may be a bit TMI, I will try my best not to, but I went into each chemotherapy session thinking, if I eat the most amount of fiber, a certain amount of hours before I have my chemotherapy, then whilst that chemical concoction is working its way around my body, I will hopefully dispose of the chemicals before I leave the hospital. And that became something that I did every fortnight. So I would pack in as much fiber as I possibly could. I would even though I was raw, I would have like cereals as well, just to really make sure that the movement would happen. And that was kind of, for me, it was me learning about the fiber in foods and fruits and vegetables, and knowing that I can affect what happens in my body. And I think that was my first step to really understanding how much control we do actually have. Because because of the chemotherapy being in an IV drip and me being there all day, there was a lot of opportunity for me to put in whilst I was there, and then never leave until it had actually happened, until the movement had happened. And so I genuinely believe that that contributed to my wellness throughout the chemotherapy, because I expected myself to be a zombie, lying on the bed poorly, being sick, vomiting all the time. None of that happened. In fact, my hair didn't even really fall out. I shaved it at the very end of chemotherapy because it was a bit patchy, but I still pretty much had what you would consider a full head of hair towards the end of it. And even though I wanted the chemicals to do the job of destroying the tumor, I didn't want the chemicals to stay in my body longer than was necessary. And so, like I said, I really used the power of knowing what fiber does and what being a raw vegan can do to your body to have optimum health. I didn't want my body to be thinking about digesting foods that were difficult to digest and would be bulky and sluggish in my system. And so I think if I hadn't become vegan before my tumor growth, I wonder if I was still eating the beige diet of dairy, cheese and milk and all those white breads and the beige diet that I had. I wonder whether or not I would have had the same outcome. And I think for me, in order to keep a really positive mind and think about my experience positively, I really do now, and this is why I've reached out to the both of you to tell my story, feel as though it was the raw vegan diet that enabled me to be as successful as I was throughout the chemotherapy.
What was it that led you on to the raw vegan diet in particular?
It was simply a belief that if it was just going back to the Garden of Eden style thinking, really, of, you know, what should we be eating? If I was just a hunter-gatherer, and I just, you know, if I'm finding berries and carrots in the ground, and it was just a case of, you know, if just going back to what humans are and what humans need and what survival mode, I suppose. And you know, if I was putting processed food in my body at a time when I was really poorly, it wouldn't be doing me any good. And equally so, if I was eating a carrot that was cooked, I'm losing all those beautiful nutrients to the water, when in fact I need those beautiful nutrients. I want to survive this. And so it was just about maximum nutrients and putting as least, kind of asking my body to do as little as possible. You know, I needed food to live. I wanted to be nourished, but I didn't want it to have to work hard because it was already working hard to survive the chemicals and get rid of the tumor. And also my brain and mental health was working hard every day. I discovered yoga as well at the same time. So that was quite wonderful. My instructor, Gail, who I just absolutely love, she was very spiritual, and so she helped me mentally. The yoga helped me mentally and physically, but then I feel as though the raw diet and knowledge about fiber and as a combination are the reasons why I'm still here now.
Wow, that's amazing, because we've both been we've both experienced eating a raw diet as well, a raw vegan diet, and we absolutely loved it. And in terms of, it's probably one of the best diets you can possibly eat as well, in terms of allowing your body to heal, because it takes the least toll on your digestion, which takes so much energy. So you've clearly researched all of that. I love the story you were telling about the fiber as well, because a lot of people hear fiber quite a lot, and they probably associate it with being able to go to the loo, but obviously it plays so much more. It's so much more important than that, and binding to things like cholesterol and toxins in our body and removing them is one of the really important roles they play. So to hear you talking about that, I was thinking, wow, she really has researched this. It's so impressive. Something else occurred to me as well when you were talking about the all of the fruits and the colors and everything that you're eating. So people, again, when we associate taking a cocktail of drugs with the chemotherapy, you also alongside it took a cocktail of plant chemicals.
And sunshine.
And sun, yeah.
You ate sunshine.
Ate the sunshine. So that's fantastic. So do you still incorporate a raw component in your current diet, or was that more of a kind of phase when you were healing?
Currently, not as much as I would like to. I do eat raw for breakfast or lunch occasionally, but in these winter months, I do fall to a warm evening meal. But as often as possible, really. I mean, the smoothies and the drinks I particularly love, and the soups. So I guess they're not raw. Yeah, so smoothies probably. It's been a little bit tough recently because of the birth of my daughter, I'll be honest. Everything's a little bit up in the air. But I am now slowly working my way back towards optimum health. And I recommend everybody tries a raw diet at some point throughout the year. It's probably easier in this country, at least, to do it in the spring, summer months because it's warmer. Yeah. Go on, Anna.
I should add that when we first did raw, we did it quite badly. It was wonderfully exciting, but it was gourmet raw. It's not the kind of raw you're talking about. And I think that's quite a distinction. You ate for health, and clearly it made a difference to you. And that's much more how we eat these days as well, having discovered that we were doing it wrong, and we needed to kind of step back and realize that we got it a bit wrong as well. We've been making lots of statements about how much coconut oil you can glug down in a week. You know, that's an exaggeration, but you know what I'm saying. So yeah, we know where you're coming from with that feeling of we got that a bit wrong, and I need to have a rethink here and redirect ourselves. So we're really glad to hear your story. It's quite exciting actually to hear yet another story of somebody who's used whole plant foods in a raw, natural state and made such a difference to themselves. I'm guessing that you attributed the illness to, it sounds as though you attributed it to stress and poor diet, and that in order to recover fully from it, which you have now done, it was again diet and stress reduction in form of yoga, for example. And I don't know if there's anything else that you've implemented, but am I right in making that assumption?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, it's before I was diagnosed, I really didn't take my health into consideration very much. Now I run, I play tennis as well as yoga. I'll try anything with anyone. Pilates. It's just going outdoors and being in the fresh air. It's almost like cancer was the worst thing and the best thing that ever happened to me. Because of the awakening that I've had to know that, you know, even if you don't have enough sleep, for example, that it really does take a massive toll on your body and your mood. And so it's difficult with a newborn, but to put things in your life in kind of that lovely order of, you know, have I had my water today, and have I been and had some fresh air today, and so you don't, you know, it's not religious. You do it, you know, I go for a walk at 7 and then I have my breakfast at 8. It's kind of just, you know, have I done that today? Oh, have I not? Did I have my B12 supplement? Yeah, I think I did. And just knowing that these things have now become second nature. I used to have to remind myself of it, but now it's almost just a passing thought. And if I haven't, then I'll fit it into the rest of my day. But it really is a lifestyle change and a different outlook on life, especially with work-life balance, because as well as having the awful beige diet, I thought that it was acceptable to run myself into the ground for my business. And it's absolutely not. I mean, if there was a list of the top 10 worst things that a new business owner should not do for burnout, I was doing all 10 of them, plus probably the next 10. It was diabolical. Even the thought of delegating, I mean, it just scared me to death. I mean, literally. There you go. So you know, it was a combination of all of those things that made me poorly, and now I'm so grateful for having found what I have done. And I genuinely feel as though the fact that I was vegan allowed me to do that. It was the stepping stone into a new, healthy life. And also, of course, with the chemotherapy, I was told that I would become infertile. And so the biggest miracle and most wondrous part of it all is that I now have an 8-month-old little daughter, Ruby, who, you know, perhaps may not have been here had I let those chemicals sit and fester in my body for longer than they did. I mean, it's all hypotheses, but you know, she's here. You know, there are unfortunately people who I knew on the ward who have had relapses and who are quite poorly again now, and it's absolutely dreadful for them. And I feel very, very, very joyous and blessed and happy and full of life, and I'm creating life, and I just genuinely think that it's veganism and the plant-based whole foods diet that's enabled me to be in this position.
I love that fact as well, that you were able to prove the doctors wrong in terms of being able to conceive again. I mean, that will perhaps give hope to others who hear this story, that it doesn't have to be follow the routes that your doctors tell you. And that's common in a lot of the stories that a lot of the interviews that we've had with people like yourself, that it almost confounds the doctors what's happened. And I think for you, that you've also gone out and proven that it is possible to heal. That's so uplifting. It really is. So this has also resulted in giving you a new zest for life and what you do in your work life, hasn't it? You've gone on quite a journey. Do you want to say a little bit about what it is that you're doing now?
Sure, absolutely. So during my chemotherapy and radiotherapy throughout that year, my daughter started, well, it was kind of towards the end of my therapy, my daughter started going to mainstream education. And it was awful because she wasn't served vegan food. She was expected to learn about the farm and so on and so on. And so during the time while I was recovering and selling the restaurant and thinking, what am I going to do next? It was almost the perfect time for her to be discriminated against at school. It's never a real good time for discrimination, but because I was looking for a new lease of life, I was thinking, well, how can I marry having been a teacher and now a vegan parent to perhaps support other vegan parents in the same situation? So I really went to town with my daughter's school, you know, and I spoke to my MP and councillors, and we became the first borough in the place where I live, Bury, to serve a rolling vegan menu to any child who wanted one, which I thought was fantastic. So I started supporting parents in that respect. And then when I started to think about, well, my daughter's now learning a curriculum that I was uncomfortable to teach. How can I now use my skills in, you know, and having been a company director now, to support schools? So I devised a training program for school teachers where I spoke about vegan inclusion. So not only now was I supporting parents, but I was also supporting schools as well, all for the benefit of vegan children. And then I thought, well, there's only one of me. I can't go in every school, so I'll write a book. So again, during my recovery, I wrote an educator's guide for vegan inclusive teaching, which is with the vegan publishers and out in the public domain for anyone to gift to their school if they would like their school to understand their children a little bit more. And from there, it's just gone from strength to strength. I've now just been given the job of the education officer at the Vegan Society. So now heading up their education department, which is fantastic because, you know, for the Vegan Society to have now a dedicated education department is spectacular. And yeah, just everything, just with the birth of my daughter and the book being published and the new job role, it all just seems as though that work through my chemotherapy and radiotherapy to keep me alive was very much worth it. Yeah.
I'm really encouraged as well that somebody like yourself is at the Vegan Society to spread the message, yes. Because I think at the moment it's where history is happening really at the moment in terms of the development of veganism and it getting out there, and to have people like yourself to promote that message further is fabulous. So we'll also in the notes we'll actually put a link about information about your book, because some people who watch this may be interested in that book as well. So That's
That's absolutely,
Absolutely,
it really
yeah.
is. It's such an important story to hear, actually, Laura, because it adds a great deal to your overall persona already of this role you've got with education. And I think when people realize that there's this added and really powerful motivational addition to what you've already got, this story about healing with whole foods, with plant foods, and moving away from the animal foods, I think it's something people need to hear, because it's not coming from mainstream medicine, as you well know. And so the more people can hear stories like yours, the better. And we are absolutely delighted that you've shared this one with us. So we do thank you very much for doing that. It really is, it means a lot to us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laura. So we'll finish up there, and just thank you for sparing your time to tell your story. And yeah, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you both for the fantastic work you're doing as well. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you.